So this terribly stealthy chronic bacterial infection is in the same family as syphilis, which is
Didn't realize.
spirochete. And
Yes.
spirochetes are known historically to be a driver of dementia. And syphilis typically really isn't a modern day issue that clinicians here in the US are facing on a daily basis. But prior to the advent of antimicrobial drugs, antibiotics specifically, tertiary syphilis or advanced syphilis that had gone to the brain. And as you pointed out, Susan, infections, spirochete infections like Borrelia burgdorferi or Treponema pallidum syphilis can actually essentially slow grow, right? Is a slow growing organism, and it travels and disseminates throughout the body, including to the brain and central nervous system.
Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics Raw, Real, Relatable podcast. I'm your host, Susan Robbins, epigenetic human performance coach. This is where we discuss all things lifestyle, environment, food, exercise, work, mind, and social interaction as they pertain to epigenetic expression in a way that's relatable to everyone. So if you're ready to start viewing you as an individual, take control of your life and health, and get results, buckle up, here we go.
Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics Raw, Real, Relatable podcast. I am your host, Susan Robbins, and this is a place where we talk about everything lifestyle, environment, and how it affects our genetic expression. Today, we are going to be talking about the brain, and we are going to be talking about pathogens. And I had been looking for somebody to discuss things like Alzheimer's with, and I came across Nikki Schultek. And Nikki, her career began in the pharmaceutical industry. She worked with Pfizer and Genentech, and then she was diagnosed with Lyme disease and chlamydia and other co-infections. And after she achieved remission, Nikki shifted her focus to advancing research in chronic illnesses. And she founded Intracell Research Group in 2017 to foster, and I love this, global collaborations among researchers, clinicians, and stakeholders to accelerate innovation in the treatment of diseases like Alzheimer's and Lyme disease. And you guys will be, I think, a little bit shocked here when you see some of the connections between Alzheimer's and Lyme. And we will bring some genetics into it as well, because as I've talked about it on here, that I'm an ApoE34, so I'm an increased risk for Alzheimer's genetically. And that's why I live the lifestyle I do to mitigate that. But we're going to discuss how pathogens impact the brain across the lifespan. And we will talk about funding, research. I think we're going to do a deep dive here. So buckle up. Here we go. Miss Nikki Schultek, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so appreciative of the introduction. The first hat that I wear every day is the patient hat. And so my experience with complex chronic illness that was being driven by infections and other factors too is the reason that I'm sitting here today with you. And one other thing that I'm really very proud of too, in addition to the Intracell Research Group in 2017, is like the evolution of that and what that turned into. In 2023, we really pivoted hard into understanding the brain pathobiome and how infections could be interacting with host genetics and the environment and other elements of the exposome, as we call it, the things that we are exposed to, to actually drive things like Alzheimer's disease. But beyond diseases that are neurodegenerative associated with aging, also, we're looking at this across the human lifespan because we know there's a relationship between pathogens or microbial infections and various neurological and psychiatric diseases that occur across the lifespan, including toddlers that can experience things called PANDAS and PANS, which are pediatric neuroimmune infectious syndromes. We founded the Alzheimer's Pathobiome Consortium in 2023 with a epic research roadmap that we published in the world's leading Alzheimer's journal, Alzheimer's and Dementia, which is the journal of the Alzheimer's Association, really calling for global collaboration. And this was really open sourcing a research plan and saying to the world, here's our plan. We would like other experts to come forth and contribute to this. We have issues that are unresolved with regard to how do we actually discover whether there's a causal relationship between an infection and Alzheimer's, or really any disease for that matter. And that, as it turns out, is one of the hardest questions you can possibly ask in science, especially when you're talking about infections that are very common or that can simmer for a lifetime.
Which
And
Lyme
then
can, or the
last year,
Alzheimer's too, right? Lyme or Alzheimer's, I mean, anything like that can, it doesn't not, it doesn't always automatically spur on immediately. It's a slow boil that the pot overflows at some point.
so with Lyme, the Borrelia burgdorferi bacterium that causes what everyone refers to as Lyme disease. So it's
Mhm.
funny, Susan, I don't love the term Lyme disease because of one reason. I feel like it robs it of what it actually is, which is an infectious disease, right? It feels like it separates it somehow, and I think that that may have over a course of time contributed to people's misunderstanding of what Lyme actually is. So this terribly stealthy chronic bacterial infection is in the same family as syphilis, which is
Didn't realize.
spirochete. And
Yes.
spirochetes are known historically to be a driver of dementia. And syphilis typically really isn't a modern day issue that clinicians here in the US are facing on a daily basis. But prior to the advent of antimicrobial drugs, antibiotics specifically, tertiary syphilis or advanced syphilis that had gone to the brain. And as you pointed out, Susan, infections, spirochete infections like Borrelia burgdorferi or treponema pallidum syphilis can actually essentially slow grow, right? Is a slow growing organism, and it travels and disseminates throughout the body, including to the brain and central nervous system. The basic outcome of syphilis is dementia. And
Dementia. Yeah.
not paying attention to that, the field not paying attention to the fact that multiple infections can actually lead to dementias. Now, there's an important distinction though. Dementia is a big umbrella, and Alzheimer's is the most common form. But yeah, there absolutely has been a association between variety of infections, not just bacteria like spirochetes, but viruses, fungal infections, and even parasites have been linked with the development of dementia and dementias of various types.
And also, I think you can't leave out of it things from the environment like metals.
Yeah,
Do they
so
have
one of
some kind of a, don't they have I've got the gadolinium issue from MRI
Mm,
contrast,
yep.
and that deposits in the brain. So that also increases my risk for types of dementia down the road. So is that part of what you look at too, or is that totally something different, something on the metal side, as opposed to you're really more focused on the infectious part of it?
So it's actually interesting. They're not uncoupled from one another. So some of the pathogens will actually sequester metals. One of the organisms that our team has spent time studying, particularly Dr. Brian Balin, Dr. Allen, and Alan Hudson and Judith Whittam Hudson, have Wilmore Webley, Dr. Charles W. Stratton, they studied a pathogen you mentioned earlier that I had, chlamydia pneumoniae. Now, most people, when they hear the word chlamydia, they think this sexually transmitted infection.
Yes, they do.
Chlamydia pneumoniae is a incredibly common, ubiquitous respiratory bacterium spread by inhaling infected droplets, like when someone sneezes in the elevator, voila. What people don't realize is that this is a obligate intracellular bacterium that in many cases can take up residence in a person for life, living inside of first the respiratory tract and then disseminating through infected immune cells, such as monocytes and other immune cells throughout the entire body, and can readily gain access to the brain via either the nose or through infected immune cells like a Trojan horse. This particular infection does really interesting things in the brain, including it can lead to dyshomeostasis of iron. And
Which I'm
so,
seeing a lot of.
are you?
Yeah, a lot of really low iron. I actually just got another iron panel back yesterday. Her I her iron and her serum iron and her ferritin are in single digits, low single digits. And this is something I'm seeing on a more common basis. And it's not like just take some iron and it gets
Right.
better. Where is this happening? And we're seeing it, like you said, coming from these other sources where you're creating this perfect storm. And the iron is ends up being a symptom of what's happening.
Yeah, so this finding of iron deposition in brain And even calcium dysregulation, for example, is linked with this particular infection. It has a number of consequences that actually very closely align with a number of chronic diseases, including mitochondrial dysfunction, because it is an ATP parasite. It does not make its own ATP, and so it actually takes energy like plugging into an outlet, stealing from our cells' little powerhouses, our mitochondria,
Mhm.
and it's a slow-growing infection like Borrelia burgdorferi. So it's not going to essentially result in a highly virulent infection that kills you rapidly. It can be an agent in hospital pneumonias, for example, and it can be very dangerous, but it's also a pathogen nobody's screening for. So when somebody develops, for example, interstitial cystitis, it's been linked with the bladder pain
Mhm.
disorder. It's been linked with various forms of arthritis, coronary artery disease, because it can actually sequester lipids. And it's been linked with Alzheimer's disease, but people don't test for it. Not only that, the testing that's currently available is insufficient. So you can get serology. You could look for IgG, immunoglobulin G or immunoglobulin N for M for chlamydia pneumoniae. However, a negative test doesn't mean you don't have it. And so it just could be beneath the threshold. You may not actually be making antibodies. And this is the case with a lot of patients. However, by the age of 50, roughly half of the global population has had the infection. And
Wow.
as you increase toward your 60s, 70s, and 80s, that number increases. And that is seroprevalence data. It's an incredibly common pathogen that no one's really paying attention to, like Lyme, Borrelia, and
That's
co
exactly what I was thinking too. It took 11 years to diagnose me, and I lived in Montana at the time, and they said, "We don't have Lyme here." People don't they won't that's what I tell people. It's everywhere. The last statistic I saw was
Yeah.
300,000 cases diagnosed every year, and that's diagnosed. Think about all the ones that aren't. And I don't know about the chlamydia pneumoniae, but Lyme, it presents as so many different things, and it could be neuro, it could be the cardiac Lyme. I had that, and it was pretty brutal, and nobody could figure out what was happening because the symptoms mimic so many different things that's what they do is just treat for those. Like you said, it took forever. It took 11 years to test me for Lyme, and we know that testing isn't that testing isn't accurate.
Yeah.
So with the chlamydia that no one's testing for either. So I'm writing this down thinking I'm keeping my options open with my people here. Like symptom wise, is it dementia type symptoms that this creates over time?
Yeah. Chlamydia pneumoniae has been associated with a number of chronic issues, right? There's a very compelling association with Alzheimer's disease. We believe that one really important clue is olfaction or the sense of smell and the passage from nose to brain. It's an
Okay.
area like where pathogens can readily exploit us because it's deficient in blood-brain barrier. So this is also inclusive of viruses like SARS-CoV-2, COVID, which caused olfactory dysfunction,
Mhm.
actually pretty disturbing because it's actually messing with the neurons. And it's a sensory dysfunction issue. We actually wrote an entire paper about this in 2024, published in the Journal of Infectious Diseases, led by our colleague Praveen Bathini, looking at the sensory system of the head and neck, so your nose, mouth, ears, and eyes, and how those systems are not only vulnerable to infections, but they could serve as gateways for infections to insult or enter brain proper. And then also, those pathways become damaged, and we see issues with vision, issues with sense of smell, taste, and hearing. And a really well documented, and this is wild, Susan, a lot of people don't realize this. There's a unifying characteristic among nearly every neurological, neurodegenerative, and psychiatric illness is olfactory dysfunction, sense of smell. And we think that that is a clue that is massively overlooked because the infections themselves can produce the olfactory loss. And then this is also a potential gateway into the brain where damage can occur, and it's an inflammatory and a chronic process. So as far as, like, you mentioned screening, so our Alzheimer's Pathobiome Initiative team, we truly feel that in spite of the limitations of some of the tests, that there are screening tests that can be used today already available. And patients should be screened for these infections if they're developing symptoms of neurocognitive decline, or if someone has new onset neuropsychiatric symptoms. They really should be screened for Borrelia burgdorferi, Babesia. They should be screened for
Right.
Bartonella. They should be screened for Mycoplasma pneumoniae, Chlamydia pneumoniae, cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus. Very strong association. The pathogen that's been most strongly associated by research that's available to Alzheimer's disease are the herpes viruses, HSV1 and 2, that cause the cold sore, or HSV2 causes genital herpes. These viruses take like basically a relapsing and remitting course where they hang out in your body. And if you are under pressure or there's another immune related issue where your body is fighting another infection, these viruses can become reactivated. And essentially, it's like repeated traumatic brain injuries. These reactivation events are insulting your brain over the course of a lifetime. We feel it would be incredibly informative to screen patients for these infections. And then if people have evidence of these infections, especially if they have risk factors, like I have one copy of ApoE4 as well.
Mhm.
ApoE4, interestingly enough, has been linked with vulnerability to and enhanced amyloid beta production with regard to some of the most commonly associated infections. One of them, chlamydia pneumoniae, and the other, the herpes viruses. So the scientists that study this relationship between Alzheimer's and infections have looked into this. And it is absolutely a vulnerability issue with ApoE4 to certain infections. Now, an interesting thing, though, is this. With evolution, why would something be conserved if it's so bad? You may have run across this in your reading, Susan, but ApoE4 appears to confer protection against malaria. So, those of us, depending upon our heritage and where we descended from in the world, this may have been conserved for a very specific and useful evolutionary purpose. And our genetics can't just be characterized by, hey, this is either good or bad. It really just is. And as you pointed out, even with E4, knowing that infection vulnerability is one of the elements, certain infections, some of the risk mitigation strategies can be simply supporting your immune system, staying
Yeah.
well, and then also, if you have active infections, getting treated for them.
Absolutely. And I think again when we dial back to lifestyle, I try to tell people when it comes to genetics, genetics is it's information. It should be empowering. They're not meant to instill fear. You and I both talked where we
Yes.
both have your ApoE, I'm sorry, ApoE, MTHFR, you are homozygous, I'm compound heterozygous. And people panic when they hear these things and they think they're diagnoses. Right? It's
Yeah.
not a diagnosis. It's just saying you may have some limitations here. May have some limitations. Is it expressing? And all of these things are that you're talking about with the pathogens. It's like we want to make sure our body is inhospitable to these pathogens as much as possible and make it easier to work with them when it happens. And I know that I unknowingly years ago when I got Lyme disease, I didn't realize how much my lifestyle was making my body just hospitable as hell for anything that wanted to take hold. So when the Lyme hit, it hit hard. And I didn't know about detox pathways, genetically set detox pathways. And I had a brutal time trying
Mm.
to get it into remission because it all just kept pooling. It just wasn't my body was just not ready for elimination. It wasn't prepared, didn't know how to do it well, and the things I was doing were keeping it where it was. And what I've seen with my body in specific and other people that I've worked with that have had some of these chronic issues is when you really can do the things that eat the nutrients that your body is starving from and get the right movements. Do things at the right times for your body. Nobody should be up all night long. Sorry, I don't care if you think you're a night person, you shouldn't be up all night long. Right there, lack of sleep, chronic stress. All of these are suppressing the immune system, which makes your body more hospitable for something to take hold or make it a lot harder to get rid of or a lot more severe symptoms when it happens. So yeah, I'm finding this super I have so I have so if you saw my notes right now, I have so many notes written down here because so much of what you're saying is making sense with what I've experienced personally and what I've seen with clients. And
Yeah.
why are we not we're it's like doctors will do these very, very basic tests and just throw a medication out there or just say, I don't know how to help you. There's really nothing wrong with you." Where, you know, and I don't know if this was you, but it sure was me trying to tell these every specialist I went to that something is not right here with me. You can tell me that, just keep going doing what you're doing, you're gonna be fine. And inside, you're just screaming that something isn't right, and people don't feel heard, and they give up, and then they turn to things that make them worse to cope, and it becomes more stress. The frustration is a stress eating at them inside, which allows these things to flourish even more. And so I think coming from the patient side of it that you and I have both experienced, we get this. And that's why I think it's so
Absolutely.
important to get this word out and for people to be their own best medical advocate and say, something is not right. What you're testing isn't working. How I'm
Right.
feeling is not improving at all. Maybe I'm getting worse. What else can we look at? Have
Yeah.
this information in your back pocket and put it out there and find someone that will listen to help you go down the right road because people lose hope.
They
And
do,
yeah,
and I think everything you're saying really so resonates. The whole reason that I do what I do, and now I the one last thing that I didn't mention that was really exciting was a year ago, I founded a pathobiome research center, which effectively don't imagine like a wet lab. It's a collaboration hub for me at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. We're an osteopathic medical school that trains DOs, doctors of osteopathy. And there, my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Brian Balin, who's one of the pioneers of the Alzheimer's infection hypothesis since 1998, he and I collaborate closely there. My center at PCOM is really geared around what I believe to be unbelievably essential. Susan, a number of things that you just drew on in what you said, which is this cross pollination of understanding the body as an ecosystem, including the exposome, also, understanding the heart of the patient, the person in front of you, as my dear friend Sandra Gold says, who she and her husband Arnold devoted themselves to something called humanism in medicine, which is really a component that can be missing, right? Especially in areas that had become controversial, which is wild that chronic bacterial infection like Lyme would be controversial, but it was. And a lot of gaslighting has happened that made people feel unseen and unheard and has resulted in some really terrible outcomes. However, I have reason for great optimism. Things are changing, and it's not just our global consortium that's doing this work or my university, the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. It's actually a global movement, I think, moving toward understanding precise drivers of chronicity and chronic disease. And some of the things that I think are incredibly essential is for not only patients to have a voice in the mix, educated patients that know their bodies, that know their disease, can be intense subject matter experts. That's me. I do not have a PhD, but I am a research assistant professor because I spent a decade studying, not because I woke up one day and said, wow, I really want to just think about bacteria and fungus and chlamydia. It was because I got sick and I needed answers. So it was like self-preservation, truly. And then I saw so many people that I love affected by these things and realized that what I could do to help was bring people together as a uniter. So what I saw in my own case, where I drifted from one specialist to the next for a year, which is not uncommon for people with Lyme disease and chronic infections. You're going, my joints hurt, your heart,
go to the
your
orthopedic, go to the cardiologist, go and then it's the hormones get thrown off, and then the thyroid comes into the mix, and go to the
absolutely.
endocrinologist. You literally hit every specialist, and they tell you there's nothing wrong with you. Your tests all
Correct,
look
and,
fine. Oh
you
my
know,
god.
you can be told things that hurt you along the way. Gaslighting, I experienced it. Then I also experienced on the opposite end of the spectrum some beautiful souls, clinicians that really wanted to help me. They just didn't have the subject matter expertise to help. So I
Yes.
ended up finding this infectious disease specialist, medical microbiologist, and global expert on that chlamydia bacteria, the respiratory one, Dr. Charles Stratton at Vanderbilt. He's the reason that I got diagnosed and treated for Lyme and co-infections. So I did have the chlamydia pneumoniae, and one of the things that it causes that is an area of our study is asthma. It
Ah,
absolutely can lead to asthma, especially asthma that the patient reports, "Oh, I got a respiratory infection, I never got better, and then after that I started wheezing and voila, I'm an adult with asthma." There's a very strong association. So our team, I'm actually a part of a bigger team. I'm a co-investigator on a 3,200 patient randomized controlled clinical trial in which one of the arms of that study enables patients to be treated with azithromycin, the macrolide antibiotic.
mhm.
This study is called I Treat PC, I Treat Primary Care, and it's recruiting at 13 sites across the country. And people have access to find out if they have chlamydia pneumoniae or mycoplasma pneumoniae, two commonly associated pathogens that have been linked with asthma. The
Where would
wild
they,
thing
if I can interrupt, where would they go to look for that?
absolutely. I believe the website for that, if they just Google lowercase I, capital treat, TREAT dash PC, and then asthma, they will find the I Treat website. It's a .org, and the study sites are listed. So if people would like to get involved or even potentially enroll, they can do so that way. But what is wild is that the literature suggests that up to 50% of asthma can be placed in durable remission with 3 to 6 months of azithromycin antibiotic, and then they stay in remission.
Wow.
So that calls into question this concept that asthma is purely an autoimmune disease in every patient. We really do need to understand upstream drivers. And
Mhm.
some of the pathogens that have been linked to one disease that's of a chronic nature is also linked to another. So it's
Yes.
like we have to pay attention to not only, as you pointed out, the host terrain, right? Some genetic mutations that some of us possess that leave us vulnerable or unable to detox or unable to access the right vitamins so that our
Mhm.
bodies can have bioavailable usage of those vitamins. These things are all key, but our global team really focuses on one aspect of it, which is the neglected piece of how microbes, microbial infections are a known driver of chronic disease. One of the things that's really problematic, though, Susan, that we're really hoping for change is additional federal funding from the National Institutes of Health and in general health and human services. So, a lot of people don't realize that the US government is the biggest funder of medical innovation in the world. It's a $50 billion a year organization entity. And right now, there's a disproportionately low amount of funding being spent on infection associated chronic illness.
Why
And,
why do you think that is? I have
you
my
know,
ideas too, but but I'd love to hear it. What?
we think it's related to a bit of human nature. We are all creatures of habit. A little bit of this is how it's always been done. I do think there's heavy play because of economics. So the economic drivers are such that there really hasn't been incentive to develop antimicrobial drugs. They don't command high return on investment for pharmaceutical companies. So pharma companies have gone toward making a lot of monoclonal antibodies, rare disease treatments, treatments that command a higher price tag and perhaps can be given to certain patients for life. Antimicrobial drugs have been one of the most difficult spaces in the entire marketplace because what a company has to pay to bring, for example, a new antibiotic to market is just as high as any other drug. But then when they actually arrive to market, they can't charge what others can charge. And additionally, most new antibiotics come out with indications for short term use. And
Mhm.
so they're just not making back the money that's gone into investments. And when you're missing that economic driver, that's like a car without an engine. Even from a federal funding standpoint, they two things bleed together. And
It
then
all
I think
comes down to the money. It's
it does.
right.
It
Isn't it?
comes back to
It's
money.
yeah. It's all.
But truly, there's reason for optimism. There are phage therapies, there are targeted antimicrobials, there are immune based therapies to boost the immune system. There are ways that we can go about mitigating and addressing these problems, stimulate the economics of it, while also accelerating federal investment in research, I actually see a tremendous amount of hope. HHS, Health and Human Services here in the US, has declared a war on Lyme disease. As of December 15th, 2025,
I didn't hear
they
that.
came together a group of us came together in Washington, D.C. with RFK and Dr. Oz and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the director of NIH, and some of the experts and advocates in the Lyme space were at this roundtable, including Dr. Bob Bransfield, who's incredible, and Dr. Mickey Tall up at MIT, who has the MIT Maestro study. They basically said the gaslighting is over. We're
Ugh,
done.
hallelujah.
Yeah, it was such a gift. And so as a patient and then as someone working in the research space, it gave me goosebumps. Like
Yeah.
they said RFK had multiple members of his family affected. Dr. Oz has multiple members of his family. It's almost hard these days to find someone who doesn't have impact, Susan.
It's like cancer. Everybody knows somebody who has cancer. Maybe they've had it themselves. Lyme is no different. Every time I talk to somebody, it's so and so had Lyme, or I've had Lyme, or I have Lyme, and it's Lyme, not Lyme's. Please, people. That's
Yeah, right?
my
I
one little
don't
pet peeve. It's not Lyme's disease. It is Lyme. But I just and I can't tell you the amount of times I'm going through symptoms with a client, and it's like the little light bulbs start going off in your head, and I say, "Have you ever been tested for Lyme?" And I've had several people, I say, "Go get tested. We need to test
yeah.
you." And it has come up, and it's such a relief for them to hear it, and they go, "I'm not crazy." So we're
Well,
like
because it can have, like you
validation.
Yeah, the symptoms can travel, right? It can be
Oh,
pain one day and numbness and tingling the next or dizziness, and it's feel you feel like you're like, "Am I losing my grip on reality or am I falling
yeah,
apart?" And
yeah.
once you connect with other people in the community, you realize how common these manifestations are, and that is empowering. As far as the solutions are concerned, our work is really centered around putting really serious effort into rigor and reproducibility and the scientific effort underpinning all of this. So, with my journey as a patient, what I realized was everything was siloed.
Mhm.
So, our team, the Alzheimer's Pathobiome Initiative and our Pathobiome Research Center at PCOM is dedicated to bridging silos. Our global team includes experts across a whole variety of domains, the host response, even veterinary medicine. We work with Dr. Ed Breichwart from NC State. We work with experts in tick-borne illness, other infections, and virologists. We also work with data scientists that can harness big data to really figure out where these disease linkages may lie and repurpose data that's already existing. So we're taking essentially a multi-pronged approach, and this global team has largely been running on support from a few philanthropic grants that we've received as a result of raising awareness and as a result of publishing our call for collaboration. And so, what we will really need, though, ultimately, Susan, in the end, in order to uncover these important linkages and to then stimulate drug development and drug repurposing to attack these horrible diseases, is to actually have a large federal investment from the United States government, pools of funding dedicated to infection-associated chronic illness, Lyme included, and then other infections that we know have been overlooked and aren't being screened for that can cause people to be chronically ill. And this is something our team is incredibly passionate about. We have, at this point in time, been working on Alzheimer's disease. We just received a grant in December from a foundation that will allow us to expand and compare Alzheimer's specimens to the people that died with ALS, Parkinson's, epilepsy, and PANDAS and PANS.
Wow.
And we believe as a team that not only breaking and bridging silos between the disciplines, but also between the diseases themselves and looking at them for similar pathologies, similar inflammatory signatures, similar infections, but in different brain regions, using various omics approaches to see how the pathogens are interacting with the host from a genetic level. And all of this, we believe, is more of how the future of research should look. It should look collaborative. It shouldn't look like one team in one place analyzes one patient specimen. And we can speak to this as patients. Like, I don't know, do you participate in any research? Have you ever given blood or
I
anything like that?
haven't. I have not.
So I'm a part of multiple studies, and I'm very thankful for that. I get very useful information from that,
Hmm.
doing access to testing. I'm a part of Lyme studies. And when I think about what I go through, if I'm going to give 18 vials of blood, I would love for that blood to be exhaustively studied by as many people as possible, not just like one team with one idea of how to approach it. Because what we know, especially with infections, is depending on the detection method, you may not see a certain infection, or
Exactly.
using another, you will. And
Yes.
which one is right? There can be false positives and false negatives. And so this development of what we call a consensus detection approach or protocol is really big. It's one of our big missions for our consortium is we want to find out what panel of tests will most accurately tell you in a specimen that you can get from a patient while they're still here, what infections they have that could be affecting their brain.
So if we first of all, I want to read this because I pulled this off of the website.
Yeah.
Increasing evidence points to this is off of the ALZPI, so the ALZPI organization.
Mhm.
So increasing evidence points to a key role of infectious agents in the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Neuroinfectious diseases such as syphilis, HIV, neuroborreliosis, and others provide meaningful clues that tailored an anti-infective treatment can reverse dementia in specific cases. It's the first organized, and this is why I wanted to read this. This is the first organized effort to precisely address the research question. And your mission was the goal is a global interdisciplinary collaboration to clarify the role of microbes in Alzheimer's disease, other dementias, and beyond. And I think just again, as you've spoken here, the key is interdisciplinary collaboration. It is no different than each person is going to respond differently. They're going to respond differently to treatments. They're going to respond differently, like you said, to the testing. For some, it's going to come up. For some, it's not going to. Our bodies are all so vastly unique because of how we live our life every day, the things we're exposed to. I'm going to be exposed to different envirotoxins in Colorado than you are going to be back on the East Coast. So that
Right.
affects us. Now, all these things have to be taken into account. And when you only have one discipline, there's an agenda with that discipline to look at something. But when you bring in the team, it's a team player. You're going to have a bigger victory by having more players on the team working together instead of just like you said, that one silo of let's just look at this. I think that's where
Absolutely.
the big piece of the puzzle is. And so I love that you put this together. But if there's anything you could leave people with to give them some hope, whether it's and maybe we could put some of these tests, if you could get those to me, maybe some to put in the show notes, some tests that people could ask for if they're having these cognitive issues and nothing seems to be moving forward with their physicians and say, "Hey, could you maybe just test for this?" Or not maybe, actually be, "I want this tested." Right? We
Yeah.
have a right to ask for these things. Reach out to me. I'm sure I have a lab that I use that I can pretty much get anything without having to worry about getting kickback. But what would you leave the audience with?
So here's the thing. There are clinicians, there are practitioners out there, root cause practitioners that can do they can address the big picture. They can screen for deficiencies in vitamins. They can look at genetics if needed. They can also screen for infections and then treat and address them in a knowledgeable fashion. This group of clinicians is called the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, ILADS,
Islands.
ILADS, ilads.org, www.ilads.org. I sit on the ILADS Education Foundation board, the educational arm. The two boards are cross-pollinating, interacting. These clinicians are the ones that can address these issues. Many of them can't accept insurance because the work they do, they might spend 4 hours on the first visit, literally going through the entire history from birth up through the current day in
Mhm.
illness. That's what I typically suggest to people that have the ability to, and not all of them don't take insurance. So there is a provider search tool on the website where you can actually
Okay.
put in where you live and then search. And then I Functional and integrative physicians as well are another
Yes.
great resource. They can be. Another medical society on the pediatric side. So, for people looking to get screened if they have a younger patient that they're concerned with neurodevelopmental issues, pandas, and also autism, is MAPS, MAPS. And their website, let me just double check so that I make sure that I'm not saying it incorrectly. But they're the organization that really, like ILADS in the tick-borne and chronic infection space, they have a similar tool to search for clinicians. Sorry, my Google search is being very strange, and it's not pulling them up. It's very odd, and I'm going to find it. Here we go, medmaps.org,
Med maps.
medmaps.org. And these are an incredible group. They offer iLads and MAPS both offer training programs for their clinicians. So, there are varying levels of expertise. And when you use their provider search tool, you can see what sort of certifications those clinicians and providers have. But those are the places I typically send patients because honestly, Susan, and you know this well, it's not just as simple as saying, okay, do I have chlamydia pneumoniae or do I have Borrelia burgdorferi? Because it's like a whole can of worms. The person could have
Absolutely.
co-infections. And the average primary care practice, they don't have the time, resources, or training to handle a complex case like this. So it's unfortunate. We what I would hope for in the future is for more clinicians and practitioners to be trained on these things globally and for these groups like MAPS and iLads to be bigger so that there is then insurance coverage, right? That they can be reimbursed for the amount of time they spend with a patient and that it can be a reimbursable situation. That would be what I would hope. But
Agree, 'cause
yeah,
the cost is the amount of money I spent and I hear from everybody, the thousands and thousands of dollars you can spend trying to get answers over to 11 years for me, and then the treatment on top of that. It it really hits the wallet, and, we need to be able to have it
and
covered.
that's the main thing that's
Yeah.
not okay. I literally just spent the whole day yesterday with the Center for Lyme Action doing the virtual lobbying day where we talk to state representatives and members of Senate. And really, the ask is for greater resources so that at this point in time, legislation and bills can be passed that would mandate coverage and would allow for patients to access better testing, like testing offered by Galaxy Diagnostics here in North Carolina or IGeneX out in California. There are better lab tests for
There are.
tick-borne illnesses and Lyme. It's just they're not covered by insurance at this point in time. But I do actually believe I leave people with hope and optimism. I actually believe we're at an inflection point right now. And the field is working. People are working tirelessly. Our group is working on it. And so that's the message I would leave for patients. Things won't stay the way they are today. And there is always hope. And listen to your body because listen to that signal. If you're with a doctor or a provider and you don't feel that they're seeing or hearing you, it's totally appropriate to find another person to see. Um,
Absolutely. Doctor shop. You have to. You have to find someone that hears you, validates you, and doesn't make you think you're crazy. Get the answers, work until you find someone that helps you get the answers you need. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm going to follow you. We will have to stay in touch for sure. And I think
Susan.
this is gonna reach some people, and like you said, I I think it gives the message that there is hope, and that those of us that have it, we're trying to get the word out there and not giving up until this is seen for the epidemic that it actually is. For all of this,
Absolutely.
and because we it it's not just these things causing Alzheimer's, and it's not just your genetics. There's so many factors that go into it, and when we can start putting these different factors together to see what someone is actually experiencing instead of just taking this guesswork or blowing them off, like you said,
Yeah.
that's where the difference is. We have to start seeing people as individuals, as humans, and not just lumping them into a category of, "This test came up fine, so sorry, there's nothing wrong with you." So there is hope, but you have to just be your own best medical advocate. Again, I think that's the best message as well. This is, you and I got where we are because we did a lot of this on our own. You have to sometimes. But with the advent of AI and ChatGPT, you can go down rabbit holes that are not correct as well. They can give you some basics, but find a professional that knows what they're doing and get the help you need. And don't give up until you find it, because it's there. So
I can't say it better myself. I agree.
I'm sure you could say it a lot more
No way.
eloquently than I do.
No
You
way, you
speak
got
so
it, girl.
beautifully.
You did it. No, you hit the nail on the head. Look for that provider that sees the person in front of them. Not You're not a case,
No.
you're not a file. You're a human, and that actually is probably the biggest first step in healing from anything.
Amen. Amen.
Amen,
Thank you so
sister.
much for joining us. Please, please,
Thank
please,
you.
people, share this today. Every single one of us, like we said, has had Lyme, has it, or knows somebody that has it, is has seen a relative with dementia, and the dementia, the brain-based, are becoming so much more prevalent. Get this information out there. Let's look for that root cause and don't just take no for an answer. Make sure that you are your best medical advocate. So thank you so much. Share this podcast today. Have a great day. Get out there and be your most authentic self. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed this week's episode, I'd love for you to share it with someone who'd find the information useful. Please leave a review anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it'll help the information get out to others. If you're interested in seeing if we're a great fit to work together, the link is in the show notes below, where you can sign up for a free consultation with me. So go make it a great day and let your authentic self shine.